Good afternoon, everyone. I have noon on my clock. I'm in Chicago, so don't know what everyone else's clocks are. Won't try to play the time zone game. But thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited for today's webinar. It's an important topic that's obviously on everyone's mind, and given how busy everyone is and the number of questions that we've gotten before the webinar even began, I'm going to try to go through the housekeeping pretty quickly. First of all, if you have questions along the way, we'll do our best to try to answer them. Please use the Q&A function on your control panel to ask questions. As I said, we'll try to get through them during the presentation. We'll try to leave some time at the end as well. And if for some reason we can't get to your question, we will have a follow-up where we'll try to address all of them. I also want to quickly introduce my partner for this call, Lori Sparger. Lori is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at Purdue University's College of Liberal Arts, and has been a thought leader in this space for quite some time. She's also been a great friend over the past several years as we've been continuing to explore how remote work can address challenges associated with college to career. In addition, my colleague Kristen Schrader is going to be on the call as well, helping us moderate and facilitate some of the questions that come through. Kristen leads the university engagement team for us, having come from the University of Maryland system and before that Nestle. So with that, our goal for today is really to discuss strategies on how to address the challenges coming from the COVID-19 virus. We are continuing to see how in-person interaction is no longer viable in a lot of circumstances, and we have no idea how long this will be or what the long-term impact or short-term impact will be. So I think what we're trying to do today is talk about what things we can be doing in response right now, both to respond to this challenge, but also make sure we have optionality for the future. We're going to be going through three areas in particular. One, how to think about wrapping up the recruiting cycle for summer internships and full-time roles, both from the perspective of companies and students. Secondly, preparing for situations and contingencies where in-person summer internships aren't possible or certain students can no longer participate. Again, fortunately, I think we're quite some time away from that being the case, but we know that is an issue for a lot of companies and students where they're concerned. And third, addressing the immediate needs of both employees and students. The fact is, this virus has thrown a monkey wrench into both business and the academic world, so how can we respond to those needs? And we'll try to hit all three of these areas, again, from the perspective of both companies and colleges as they very much intersect. For companies in particular, we're hearing a lot about contingency planning for summer programs. The latest NACE data shows over 90% of companies still plan on having summer internship programs, but the reality is that may change depending on how long this lockdown takes place. And as summer programs may also continue to evolve, with more companies trying to think about virtual programs. And a lot of companies don't feel prepared in the event this happens. For companies that aren't used to virtual or remote, they're trying to figure out how to respond in particular. And even those companies that are used to remote workers or remote work, how do they replicate what a summer internship program has in a way that still provides that experience for the student? We also may have students not able to participate in these summer internship programs because of travel limitations or otherwise, and they're trying to think about insurance policies. How do they make sure that if their internship program does happen, they have backups? We also have employers that are worried about the long-term hiring impact. Again, this tends to be the exception based upon the current NACE data. We are seeing it a bit in certain industries, obviously ones like travel and hospitality, but for the most part, this virus and this situation has not impacted long-term hiring needs. We are seeing immediate business impact though, both on HR and others. Within HR departments, more and more companies are trying to think about how to use remote tools, putting in place policies and procedures for remote workers, things that didn't happen in the past. We're also seeing changes to other immediate needs. We're hearing more and more from companies that have seen spike in demand in various areas where, again, they need those extra set of hands. And while recruiting for some fields may be done, as Lori can share, many programs are still looking.
That's right. On our campus, for example, within the college, we had a social impact career fair, something new we were doing that was going to bring in nonprofits, B Corps, public benefit companies, to offer students with an interest in those kinds of fields the opportunity for connection. We'll no longer be able to have that. The university has a just-in-time career fair, a career fair that happens a couple of weeks before students finish classes. And again, that won't happen. Students aren't on campus. And so there won't be the opportunity for employers to use the university as the direct conduit to in-person conversations with students. And so, we're trying to explore and understand what the options are. For us, a step into some of the video options has a pretty high financial bar. For some of the companies that would be not-for-profits, they aren't really practical at scale for them either. And so we're looking both for solutions that we can implement, and then solutions that companies, especially in some instances, bigger companies, have the capability of bringing to us, and finding out how we each find a way to create that connection between students and employers. So, we now are about 2 days into having most of our services for students, whether it's academic advising, career advising, undergraduate recruitment, all moving into a telework atmosphere. We are learning as we go. Students are learning how to interact with us as we go. And then on the career side, there is the third piece of figuring out, how do we connect with employers? How do we bring the two together in ways that are productive for everyone? We still have a lot of students who are looking for internships for this summer. We're working really hard to figure out how to make this very different semester for our students, half semester for our students, memorable, impactful, to create an opportunity for students to really still use the last 8 weeks that they have, not physically at Purdue, but online at Purdue, to still launch them into the kinds of careers that they anticipated when they entered. Students are now going to be in a whole different situation. A lot of students who hadn't lived with mom and dad for a while may be back there again. Students who were deeply engaged with activities across campus, students who had a Purdue bucket list as seniors that they hoped that they would be able to fill, aren't going to be able to do that. And so as they adjust to this new fully online learning environment, I anticipate they also are going to find that they have time that they wouldn't have had they been here. And so, we want to find ways to help them think about how to use that effectively. If they don't have the opportunity to take advantage of a leadership opportunity on campus, what are the other ways that we can help create that for them? What are the ways that we can make the fact that they have some extra time in an unexpected way really productive for them? So, for liberal arts students, we really face a different kind of recruiting environment. We talk with them all the time on a campus that is so STEM dominant about the fact that they tend to have a different kind of recruiting cycle. And so, an important thing I think to think about for many of these students is they thought they had time. They are going into positions where businesses typically hire for a business need, and there was an expectation that really when it would get interesting for them was in April and May, when people were ready to hire, when they needed those hands on deck. And so, when we look at this and realize it can't be in-person, on-site, traditional events, all of the ways that we typically have worked, we're looking at how we maximize things like our online opportunities, the ways that we can connect them across different channels. Jeffrey will talk in just a minute more about this remote work that is characterized as micro internships through Parker Dewey. And a thing that we're just beginning to talk about is, how do we enable students to step into those opportunities and, as I said the other day to Jeffrey, really look at those as an opportunity to have an interview on steroids, an opportunity not just to connect with employers, to say what they can do, but an opportunity to step in and really show what they can do. And so I think that's a piece of what's interesting. I think for there are some students, and I'm sure companies as well, there is a big question mark about what happens with internships that they have already signed in to do. Are they going to be able to travel? Are the businesses going to be able to even work on site? You know, are these next 8 weeks of online instruction for the students going to be amazing preparation for them to be great remote workers, and what are the ways that we step into that? I think it also, you know, for students who may not be able to travel, finding these ways to connect will ensure that they do have those kinds of opportunities that allow them to build out a resume and to really prove what they can do. The thing that we're finding right now on campus is that because we're having to reboot everything, whether it's undergraduate recruitment, our career space, our academic advising, we need different hands on deck in some different ways. We're thinking about what it is that we need to be able to do to help the people on campus who are remote workers who never intended to do that successfully. We're looking at ways that actually we may be able to leverage our students and have them be the conduit for us to things like meaningful social media engagement, meaningful opportunities to connect with students, whether it's current or prospective students, where they live, and to take advantage of the things that our students know about that. So there are lots of opportunities that you know, 2 days in, we're trying to sift through as fast as we can, because there are also clocks on the horizon that that suggest that we'll need to be able to move rapidly to affect change. And I think in a moment like this, we all have an interesting opportunity, you know, standing on a burning platform, to figure out how we navigate this space in the most productive ways possible, the most interesting ways possible. We will find things that we will do and we will never do again. And we will find things that we would never have done and we'll never let go of them again. So it's all very interesting at this point for us.
Yeah, and again, what's been great about working with Lori and the team, along with, again, so many of the other schools, is everyone is focused on the fact that we're all feeling these problems. We're all feeling them in different ways, and we're all working productively to find solutions, and solutions that benefit everyone. So again, what is remote project-based work? As Lori said, it's something we call micro internships. And as we think about defining them, these are not driving an Uber. These are not projects that are about walking someone's dog or picking up someone's dry cleaning or making coffee. What we've seen over the past decade is an increasing acceptance by companies of having people outside of the four walls of their organization work on real professional assignments. In fact, over 50% of professionals across the U.S. have used remote labor on tasks that are important, but again, not the best use of their time. So for the purpose of this conversation, as we talk about remote project-based work, we're thinking about short-term projects that require anywhere from 20 to 40 hours of work in total, tend to be due a few days to a few weeks out. So these are not 6-month engagements, and they're not 6-minute engagements. These are, again, short-term, bite-sized, but they're real and professional. They're assignments that are similar to those that are given to new hires or summer interns. They have defined beginnings and end. They tend to be done remotely. So again, they provide an opportunity for students to engage with companies and vice versa without necessarily being face-to-face. They are paid. So these are not unpaid internships, but these provide ways for students to make some money while working on these assignments. Again, what we've seen is typically about 15 to 20 bucks an hour. What we've also found is that money is not the primary driver for the student or for the company. So companies aren't using this as cheap labor the same way students like getting paid, but it's not the primary driver. They see the other value. What we've also seen is remote project-based work with students tends to be comprehensive. It's used across industries, across departments, doesn't matter whether it's a one-person startup or a Fortune 100 company. Every professional has remote projects that need to be done. We all have these we should and I shouldn't tasks on our plate. Again, it doesn't matter what industry. We've seen things like content creation. We need someone to research and draft a blog article. Things like lead generation. We want someone to help us find details on certain prospects or certain industries. Things in HR. Again, right now we've seen a huge uptick in remote projects around identifying best practices for remote work tools, What's the difference between Slack and Trello? Or develop policies tied to remote work, or we need to rethink our job descriptions, help us do a competitive analysis. And again, Lori, would love your thoughts on this and how some of these projects, again, tied to the skills that you're seeing of the liberal arts students.
Right. I think what's interesting in the times that we're in all of a sudden is that the ability to communicate effectively amid chaos in all sorts of different ways is really important. And, and when you think about things like social media and content creation, when you think about data analysis and interpretation, about doing research, I think the ability that our students, and I'm speaking broadly about liberal arts across the spectrum, have the ability to step in and do with minimal direction is really exciting to me. I think that there are lots of ways that this can be an important moment for our students to shine, to step in the midst of a lot of chaos and show that the ways in which they communicate well and problem solve, the ways in which they can work on distributed teams because no one's going to be able to be in a room together, to really bring something to the table that brings in a human element in an incredibly human moment can really be a defining moment for them. And I think it also is going to be a way that employers can step in softly to realize that they maybe need to look more broadly than the top of a resume that says what a student's major is, and dig in a little bit further and understand what a major means and what kind of preparation that really creates among these students. And so when I look at these kinds of sample projects, it's really exciting for me because it will help students who didn't come to college maybe with a career path in mind find ways that they can explore and really shine along the way.
Yeah, I mean, Lori, one of the things you've always said is how do we help the students who understand or to understand what job options are available when their major or their class doesn't sound like a job title. And I think that, again, very much rings true. And it's bi-directional. It's how do we help companies understand those things as well.
Right. And, for students, there are always companies that they know, right? I mean, we could all pretty quickly go through the list of the kinds of places that 22-year-olds would say they want to work. But I think, this is a moment where I talked about storytelling, and I think the storytelling will be important for companies as well in terms of how they're communicating with students to help them understand what they have to offer as employers, what the different kinds of roles are, how those can come together along the way. And, we will find ways that allow those recruiters and hiring managers to have interesting conversations with students. It may open the opportunity space for all of the companies that don't have the resources to actually come here and find that all of a sudden the playing field has been leveled for them because they are equally able to have a Zoom call that we invite a group of students to participate in to learn more about an opportunity. It could be a way that they can work with us to reach specifically into the kinds of populations that they're interested in without the burden of having to come to campus to do it. For everyone who can come to campus and host a pizza party, all of a sudden everybody who can't can catch up. And I think that's an interesting thing as well. With colleges and universities, a lot of what we think and say about the places that we inhabit is that, oh, if we can get them here, then they'll just see. If I can get them here to meet our students, they'll just see. And now we'll be forced to do just the opposite. We'll be forced to have to reflect out in some different ways that I think will be important. And, another thing that is interesting and true and sometimes frustrating about college students is that, newsflash, they don't read their email. We communicate with them in a lot of ways, but I think what I told my students before they left at the end of what turned out to be the in-person portion of the semester before spring break is, hey, you guys are going to have to get better at that. You don't really use your emails very well. You're in GroupMe, you're in text, you are communicating in other ways, but you're going to have to step into the way that the world of work, the world of the university is communicating. And so if they do that successfully, then I think we will be able to communicate with them a little bit better about the kinds of opportunities that are out there for them. And so again, a part of what I've been saying is, you look at this and you have to think, okay, lemons and lemonade, how do we get from one to the other? And I think as we communicate with our students and maybe find them more receptive because they are more distributed, that we can create some ways for them to move into different spaces than they might have in some instances, even if they still were on campus. So, I think that, as I've said, that this opportunity to have students start working for your company now is kind of an interview on steroids. It is an opportunity to see what they can do, how well they communicate, how well they are going to respond to deadlines, all of those kinds of things. I think it does the same thing for the students who think they want to do a thing because they think they know what it is, can begin to find that out a little bit better now. I think, I was reading an article just before I got on that was talking about a person who led a distributed team. And so when they were coming together for weekly team meetings, the person would send every meeting the same pizza from the same place so that they could create a shared experience, a shared opportunity to come together. And I think there are ways that companies may be able to think creatively about, okay, what are the interesting ways that we communicate with students? It may pull us all into different ways of interacting with one another that we will carry forward, and figuring out what are the tools that work best to really be able to get our points across, help people understand what it means to work for us or to hire our students. And we'll figure out what tools work. We are really interested in understanding what are the tools that some of the companies are using internally that we should be learning, or that we should have the opportunity to introduce to our students so that they're prepared for those different kinds of remote environments. It's a terrifying and exciting time. And so I think everybody can embrace that in a whole lot of different ways. So summer internships were very much on the minds of students before they left campus. Students who already had internships are nervous about what's going to happen. Are they going to be able to travel to the places that they thought they would be? What will it look like? Are their cohorts suddenly going to be different? Is that whole system going to change for them? I think for companies, I had an interesting conversation about a group of students that's already been identified earlier this year as part of a long process for a company's internship program. And, the person who spent all of her time, you can see the code on the screen, spent all of her time working on pulling this together, identifying these students and arranging to bring them in, creating a summer of both work and experience for them, and doesn't know if that's going to be able to happen now and what that means. And so, I think it may be possible that there will be a little bit of rebooting that happens. For one reason or another, there may be more students who have to step out of some of those opportunities that they had expected to participate in. And so, there may be some degree to which employers are going to have to think about whether they repopulate. Who was number 2 on the list, and when do you need to go back to them? When do you need to have conversations about what does summer really look like for you? In this environment, part of what I'm telling people is you have to be careful what you plan for next week, because the world is changing from Monday to Tuesday, let alone Monday to a week from Thursday. And I think those will be part of the challenges for employers to think about, how do we fill this? How does this work? How does this change? And how does this change enhance what we're able to do in some interesting ways?
Yeah, and I think that's important. I mean, the quote on the left was an interesting one that you shared from one of the employers, and a question came up on the chat about companies that are canceling internship programs yet. I think I alluded to at the beginning of the panel. 90% of companies have said that there have been no changes to their internship program yet. But I would say that survey was done, I think, last Friday, and the situation is dynamic. And I think a lot is going on. And what's changed between last week and this week is material. I can tell you that probably 100% of companies, or at least close to it, are at least thinking about what happens if. So it's not that they're canceling programs yet by any stretch, but they are doing contingency planning. And again, that comes up to a very important point that should this situation continue, companies need to think about how do we replicate the summer internship experience if it needs to take place remotely. Think about all of the team building and interaction and engagement events that take place throughout the summer that go beyond just doing the work and assessing the candidates. There's all of those other things that drive exposure to companies. Again, fortunately, we're seeing more and more tools available for remote work, whether it's Slack or Trello or Google Hangouts, and more companies are accessing resources. LinkedIn has a tremendous amount of content on best practices for remote work. And what I would say is right now, one of the best things both companies and colleges can do is find ways to explore these tools and expose them to the various stakeholders. Expose them to hiring managers, expose them to students so they can start thinking about how do we engage, should our summer internship program be remote? Now, for companies that aren't yet comfortable using remote workers, and again, we talk with them all the time, in particular in industries like financial services or healthcare, where there's so many regulations, it's certainly an area that's worth digging in. Now, one of the things that's interesting that we found in those sectors is while human capital or human resource departments may not realize hiring managers are using remote workers, data shows over 50% of managers are using them. And a lot of times it's taking place under a rogue spending. They're using freelancers and putting it on their corporate card. So one of my suggestions to companies is, as you're thinking about remote work, if you're an organization that hasn't historically done it or is not comfortable to it, go find the managers that are using remote workers. Go talk with someone in procurement or accounting to find out who has spend on remote work. And instead of yelling at them or telling them to stop, engage them. Ask for their help. Ask what tools they're using. Ask what types of projects and best practices they have for remote work. And what you should do, or what you can do, is use those insights to engage them to give those same projects that they're giving to remote workers, ask them to give it to college students and to provide you with feedback on those college students, because not only will this let you start to identify best practices that are already in place in your organization, you'll also identify a team of advocates. You'll have these employees who are already using remote workers and they're doing it in the shadows. You can bring them into the metaphorical light and engage them as promoters of this model. The other thing you can do is use them to engage the student workers. Use them to get insights into how the Purdue liberal arts student did on that project. Tell me about his or her communication skills or problem solving or attention to detail, because these are ways that you can really use it to build that pipeline of talent, whether it's for a summer internship program or in general. And for those companies that already are using remote workers or already embracing it, again, my suggestion to the HR leaders on the call is harness it. Be proactive about it. Encourage the hiring managers who are already using remote workers to use college students in those roles. Because not only are they still getting that support they need, but it's also helping you identify and assess potential candidates for future roles. It lets you build relationships with colleges you may not be visiting, or nurture candidates, as Lori said, who weren't considering your company. And where it gets even more interesting is you can even fund it for them. If you use dollars from the recruiting budget to give them those resources, not only will they be thrilled to help, but they'll be as proactive advocates for the benefits. And they'll be willing to serve as campus ambassadors, if you will, for the students that you're interested in recruiting. Now, for the colleges, again, a lot of schools right now are implementing remote learning platforms. Even colleges that had remote learning as part of their curriculum, they're taking it to a whole different level. Think about how those tools and best practices could support your students as they're engaging with companies. Help the students understand the relevancy of those platforms to professional work assignments. Another thing that we're hearing a lot is students who've accepted internships or full-time roles are already reaching out to employers. And they're reaching out proactively to offer assistance. And the reason they're doing it is a couple of fold. One reason is they're trying to protect themselves. They want to be seen as valuable and important, especially in this time of risk around summer internship programs and potentially even full-time roles, depending on how this situation evolves. The second thing we're finding is it's a great way for the students to start to prove and demonstrate their capabilities on these remote tools to the extent it continues. The last big area we're seeing this come into play is responding to the current situation. To my earlier point, many departments at probably just about every company are feeling the impact of this right now. As HR leaders, we're feeling it around identifying remote tools or creating new best practices or policies around remote work. Within marketing, they're feeling it around new content they need to create or sales engagement or all of these other areas that are seeing spikes in demand because of the current situation. And while they're still working from home, business is still taking place. And at the same time, the students, to Lori's point, are looking for ways to stay engaged. Their on-campus activities have been shut down. They're not able to participate in the same level of activities as they once were. They're looking for ways to stay engaged and be productive with their time. So for companies, again, one of the things we would suggest is identify those departments that are feeling the immediate impact and offer to give them remote workers as a way to get support on these projects. And one of the things we're seeing that's actually really, really interesting is that HR leaders are going to their professionals and saying, hey, Jeff, you graduated from, sorry, Lori, Indiana University. We want you to go have Indiana students, current Indiana students, provide support for you on your projects. What it does is it lets the employee feel like they're giving back. It lets the employee feel like they're being given a benefit. It lets them feel good about helping a student during this trying time. And at the same time, again, it could lead to a new hire. The flip side of this is for the colleges, you have alumni that want to help. There are millions of Purdue alums out there who want to give back to the school. Engage them. Reach out to them, let them know that they can provide these opportunities for your students right now. You can even encourage your students to ask. I mean, one of the things we're seeing through the American Marketing Association is they actually have student chapters on campus across the country. Those student leaders at those chapters are reaching out to companies, to AMA professionals at companies offering to help on their remote project-based work. And they were doing this before the current situation, but it's a situation that's actually expanding pretty dramatically because of what's going on right now. They want to get these experiences and the companies are looking for the help. What better way to demonstrate initiative and grit and desire than as a student to reach out to a company offering to help?
Yeah, and I'll hop.
We also don't know. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
I can hop in for just a quick second right there. 2 points. One is that with employers who already have hired some of these students, you may have an interesting opportunity to have a conversation with them about coming on board earlier. Not full-time, they're still completing their studies, but they may be able to participate actively as part of your organization, either in person or remotely, earlier than you ever thought. And so I think that's an interesting piece to think about. The other thing that I would say is that I have talked with students about finding ways to tell their story authentically and in original ways. And I think that what has happened to this semester for all college students will not be an original story, but the ways in which students respond to what has happened will be. And I think that there are lots of ways that students will be able to contribute, whether it is through something like remote work and in your companies or elsewhere, that really can set them apart. And so again, it's a place in which I think that all of these students can have an opportunity to really shine in ways that they never would have dreamed were possible in August when the school year started.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a great point. And again, it takes what's a very challenging situation and really creates an outcome that helps the companies and the students alike. So thanks for sharing that. Because the reality is we don't know how this is all going to shake out. I mean, for companies, we don't know whether this is going to lead to a decrease in headcount, or if it's going to create more openness for remote work, or there could be any number of other outcomes that come from this. And for students, again, we don't know what's going to happen with summer internships. And for those students who are counting on the summer internship, if it gets canceled, is that not just going to hurt their summer, but is it going to hurt their long-term employment prospects or job prospects? Or if I take a job with a company, a full-time role, is it going to exist in 6 months because of, call it, ongoing impact of this current situation? Again, we're all hopeful that this will just sort of go through its cycle and business will return to normal. But I do think we need to prepare for contingencies. And I do think there will be some fundamental changes in how organizations view remote work. Not that they're going to replace employees or offices with remote workers, but they're going to start to think more proactively about how this fits into larger systems. So again, for companies, as Lori said, it's a great time to engage the students now. If you've already made your hiring decisions for summer interns or full-time positions, let them know now that you have opportunities for them to start. Not full-time, but part-time on projects. It's a great way to get them onboarded into the company, but also getting them comfortable with remote tools should this situation continue. Another thing we're hearing from a lot of companies is for those students who are close, maybe students you made an offer to and they didn't accept, or students you were on the fence about and decided not to make an offer to. It's a great opportunity to engage them, whether it's to nurture them or to serve as a backup to the extent, again, summer programs are impacted in a way that not everyone who accepted the role is able to start. And as Lori talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of companies that aren't done with campus recruiting. And one of the things that we've talked about doing and have seen happening is companies redeploying the funds they were going to use on Frisbees and chicken skewers to provide these paid opportunities for students. Now, as much as I like Frisbees and chicken skewers, this provides a really impactful way, especially if you can't be on campus, to build your relationships with students and to introduce your brand and to assess them and nurture them. Now, for the colleges, again, recognize that the companies are feeling disruption and they're trying to figure things out. One of the things we talk a lot about is empathy. Try to talk with your employer partners and understand what is the pain they're feeling now, whether it's not being able to fill open positions or concerns about their internship program or anything else. And start to focus on ways that you can support them through some of this remote work. In the same way, encourage your students to use the remote tools. Take the tools they're learning in the classroom or applying in the classroom right now with online classes and have them work on, again, real assignments. One of the other things that we're also seeing is a lot of schools, and this came up in some of the questions both before the webinar and during, is for student workers, for students who are engaged in on-campus employment. Obviously, that's not feasible right now. You can redeploy them through remote projects, whether they're tied to the types of roles they were doing with their existing on-campus employment or otherwise. Give them opportunities to help. It's a great way to not only help them, but to also, again, provide support to the school itself during these times. And look, at the end of the day, we're not suggesting, and we don't think anyone should consider replacing on-site, in-person work, whether it's through summer internships or full-time roles or anything else, with remote workers. But we do think that this current situation has created a real catalyst for organizations to think about remote work and think about how it fits in, whether it's tied to the immediate needs or the longer term goals. And we want employers to really think about how they use remote work to develop and nurture their candidate pipeline, to build relationships with students who they may want to hire that they may have missed because they didn't go to a certain school or have a certain major, or to evaluate the work product of a student. Think about the student from, again, Purdue Liberal Arts that has incredible research skills and communication and grit and problem solving. This lets you see those skills in action when they're actually working on assignments. They also provide a way to mutually assess fit, help students understand the roles that are available at your company, help students see what it's really like to do a job through a specific project, while also, again, providing that immediate support.
And I think for students, you know, Jeffrey's talking about the immediate needs of employers, but there's also an immediate need for students. So there is a lot of stress for these students about the fact that their campus jobs are now gone. We learned this morning that our co-rec, our recreational facility, closed today and is closed for the foreseeable future. And, you know, there's students who were working there, the students who are working in our art galleries that will no longer be open, the students who are working in the dining halls that are going to have capacity dramatically cut. Even if they are local and still on campus, their ability to make money is gone. And there aren't going to be a lot of jobs necessarily in the community, as we don't have 32,000 undergraduates coming back to campus on Monday. And so, you know, there will be lots of students who need an opportunity, who are going to be highly motivated to find a way to, you know, to generate some income. And if that means that instead of working in a job that has nothing directly related to what they're interested in professionally, and pivoting to projects where they can gain those experiences, I think that's a really extraordinary opportunity that we're in right now. Another thing that I will say is that 2 weeks ago, everyone thought they knew where to find Purdue University students, right? They were on the West Lafayette campus. Now they aren't. They are all over the country. Some of them are all around the world. And that may mean that students who could be your top candidates are suddenly also local candidates. So we're talking about remote work, but it actually, you know, the entire paradigm has blown up in terms of where our students are right now. They are everywhere. And so there may be all sorts of opportunity that did not exist before. I think, you know, again, fit is going to be important for both sides, and there are lots of ways to be able to do that. And, you know, if this has opened the opportunity space to pivoting to a more distributed and remote workforce, then, you know, maybe what you thought your fit was in your company 2 weeks ago is even changing a bit now. And so I think that really this creates wins on both sides of the coin in terms of what we're talking about here. So next steps. Again, for us, I think that the universities have to communicate well on both sides. I think we need to find the ways to make sure that we continue the dialogue with employers who aren't going to be able to be here, but to make sure that they understand that our students are in need as much as they were before of professional opportunities and professional connections, that there are still students who are trying to figure out what kinds of internships they can do in interesting ways. There may be some degree to which some of those students are going to be less comfortable with leaving home in the situation that they're in. And so exploring those as remote opportunities through projects or through remote internships, I think can be really important. In 8 weeks, they will have had more experience in a whole variety of online platforms than probably any set of graduates has before. And that's going to be true from universities all across the country. There will be students who will interact with professors who are very high tech and will be doing things at a very high level, and they will interact with professors who in August would have said, I will never teach a course online, and figuring out how to make that work on both ends. And so I think they will have a variety of skills and capabilities that they're going to bring forward that they might not have brought forward when they graduated before. And I think finding ways to leverage those, and then for us as universities to really talk with students about seeing what they're doing and seeing the skills that they're building and reflecting those out in the conversations that they have and on their resumes. And so we have an email that's going to go out to all of our students Sunday night that we're in the middle of crafting right now. And even in the course of this conversation, I have sort of thought, okay, as we put this email together, in addition to talking with students about this new online platform, about this new set of online interactions in terms of student services, I think we'll add some language to it that really talks about what this opportunity is that they have in front of them now and how they push it forward and leverage it for internships, for their first jobs, and make it part of the conversations that they have with employers along the way.
Yeah, and again, it's so incredible to see the responsiveness of the colleges during this trying time. And again, thank you, Laurie, for all of that. The company's the same way. Your recruiting doesn't need to stop. Again, the data shows no one thinks, or the vast majority of organizations don't think their summer internships are not going to happen. They think they're still going to take place. The vast majority of organizations aren't changing their hiring plans long term. They recognize they still are going to need new hires come September and certainly next year as well. Remote work becomes a way to continue towards that path, whether it's around identifying, assessing, training those individuals. I think there will be some immediate impact. There may be a higher level of ghosting. I think something like 87% of companies in last year's internship season had some level of ghosting. So again, the students who accepted but didn't show up. My expectation is that it will be higher this year and a larger number of those students in particular, just as we see travel restrictions and others. So I think it's important for companies to prepare for that disruption, whether it means having other candidates that they can engage or being prepared for remote work or the ability to offer remote work. And I think it's also important, again, that companies think about access or addressing the backlog of assignments that are taking place. Again, everyone's work has been disrupted. There are more things than ever on people's backlogs not getting done. In fact, one of the questions that came through was, in this trying time where everyone is so busy, how can companies create opportunities for micro internships? Won't that create more work? And what we're finding is the opposite. It's a great way to offload work. It's a great way, and not offload in a negative way, the tasks that need to get done that are high time intensive, that are important, that are valuable, that require time and research to execute. College students, as Laurie said, are thrilled to work on these. They're excited to work on these opportunities. They have the time as activities are canceled. So it actually becomes a net provider of additional time or resource as opposed to taking the time. So I know we've tried to answer questions along the way. And again, Kristen, thank you for that. A couple of things that came up. One that I want to make sure we hit on. One is about training. So can students really work on these projects independently? What level of onboarding is required? One of the things that we've seen over the past 5 years of sort of facilitating these remote work opportunities for students is the vast majority of projects require little to no training. Again, Laurie, if one of your Purdue liberal arts students was asked to do competitive research or write a blog article, I mean, isn't that just like what they're doing in philosophy class or English class, just in the professional setting?
Oh, absolutely. It aligns really well. And there are ways that many of them are also doing some of those things on their own through their student organizations and other kinds of activities. And so it is, for many students, a very natural space.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we're finding is that if you go to your hiring manager and you say, tell me about 3 things that are on your backlog that you don't have time for right now, or 3 things that you're working on that aren't the best use of your time, we all have them. We all have them, and very, very few of them require deep, in-depth sort of industry knowledge. But they require skills like, again, communication, research, drafting content effectively. These are all the things that are again, perfect for these types of students. We got a couple of questions around legality of this. I can't speak to other ways remote work is taking place. It is an area that is called challenging, to say the least, in a lot of cases because of bad actors. So I can only talk to our platform. Our platform is 100% legal. We have spent a ton of time and effort working with legal counsel and employment lawyers to make sure. That's why every one of the projects is paid. Every one of the projects is professional. What's also important is we don't and we never will charge a conversion fee. So to another question about students who work on micro internships, if they get hired for full-time roles, it happens all the time. And there's never any fees because, again, we don't want to create that disincentive to hire. So we are very, very belts and suspenders around legality. Things I would keep note of, again, both from a company perspective and a university perspective, for folks offering remote work that's unpaid. In a lot of cases, that is illegal. Unpaid internships are already very much in the gray area, and remote ones, again, I would just be super cautious. The other thing to think about ties to employee classification and structure. So again, if you're working with remote workers, I strongly urge you to talk with your legal counsel to make sure that it's being handled the right way. And obviously happy to share more about some of our learnings over the past 5 years on that. I'm trying to see if there were any other questions that weren't answered. And again, huge credit to Kristen for doing that along the way. Lori, were there any other topics that you wanted to hit, since Kristen hit through so many of the questions?
So there are a couple of questions that I'm looking at that I will try and answer. So there was a question about students needing a work laptop to do remote work. So I recognize that will vary by company based on sort of security protocols and those other kinds of things. I think we're in a situation where people will need to find ways to be more flexible about some of that. In terms of students, so there's a secondary question about students who might not have a laptop, who relied on the school or the library for computer access. I know in our instance, because we are going to have students who will be doing online education for the next 8 weeks, students who are in areas where they don't have high bandwidth internet connections, where students who don't have laptops, things like that, can work with our Office of the Dean of Students. And so I think it is safe to assume that any student who is on fully online learning for the semester will have some computer connectivity that they will be able to leverage. There was also a question about our students and whether they're still going to be able to connect with employers who were going to participate in this career fair. And yes, so we're sharing information with the employers about sort of how we're having to reboot that in terms of both internships and full-time hires. We are pulling together information and instructing students to upload their information into our MyCCO system at Purdue so that they will be able to do that and rank the selection of the positions that were of most interest for them. Employers will then have access to those student choices and will be able to reach out to students through phone calls, Zoom calls, WebEx, whatever it is that they decide to move from at that point. Not the best of all possible situations, but trying where we can to at least retain some of the opportunity for students to connect with these employers and for these employers to connect with our students.
No, that's helpful. And a couple other questions that came in before the webinar that I forgot to look at the list. Sorry, everyone. What are the students saying? How do they want to engage with us? I mean, that goes back a little bit to my comment about chicken skewers and Frisbees. I think for to a large extent, students are recognizing the importance of career fairs going and shaking hands and meeting people, but that's not necessarily giving them the insights they want around a company. Or they'll go visit a website and a career page and they'll see videos and all of the information. It's, again, not giving them the insights of the company. I think one of the things that remote work does is it lets students get more real, authentic engagement with an organization. And again, it's not nearly going to be as comprehensive as a traditional 10-week summer internship or a series of projects that are done over a summer, whether it's on-site or remote, should this situation continue, but it at least gives them a taste. And one of the students about 6 months ago defined it really well as dating. He said that the summer internship is an engagement, the full-time job is marriage. What his comment was I want a way to date. I want a way to really get to know a company a bit. And by the way, if it's not a great experience, that's okay. We don't have to go on another date. But if it is, then we can start to dig in. It's low stakes for both. And I thought it was really a good metaphor because I said, well, aren't job interviews or career fairs or info sessions dates? He said, no, those are like swiping right or left on Tinder. And again, unfortunately, I'm too old to fully appreciate the reference, but I got it. So that's one of the things we're hearing a lot from the companies about engagement. Another question came up around how are companies holding the interns accountable when their work is remote? What we're seeing is the accountability is not based upon hours worked, but based upon quality of work. So if I, as an employer, ask a student to, again, research and draft a 1,000-word article on a given topic, did I get to work on time? Was it thoughtful? Was there attention to detail, both in grammar, spelling, etc.? Did they include the number of references I asked for? Did they demonstrate empathy to understand why I was asking for that assignment and make sure it got done in a thoughtful way? Those are the ways we're seeing the companies really evaluate the work product, which is pretty neat to see because those are much better signals than, as Lori said, what's at the top of a resume with school and major.
And I do think that the fact that micro internships are paid projects does add a level of accountability for everyone. You know, in another life, I was marketing director for a theater, and I had a love-hate relationship with comp tickets, with tickets that people got for free for one reason or another, because there was a higher likelihood of no-shows than if they had a little bit of skin in the game and bought the ticket. And I think paid projects are a little bit the same for me.
Yeah, it's everyone's interests are aligned, and that's one of the things is it creates this win-win. And one of the questions that came up was how do we help people come up with remote work assignments? And I think this was a question asked by one of the companies. So as an HR leader, how do you get your departments to come up with them? And again, the first thing I would say is go find the departments that are already using remote workers, maybe in a rogue way or in the shadows. The second thing we're seeing is a lot of quote unquote unbundling of job descriptions. So go look at a job description for an open role and look at 2 or 3 or 4 of the responsibilities or tasks associated with that role and think about those as discrete projects, discrete beginning, discrete end. Those are the perfect examples of remote work because they're bite-sized, they're low risk, they can be done independently without a lot of onboarding. And in fact, there's a larger issue, not necessarily tied to remote work, but in general in the workplace, tied to projectizing work. That we as employees should all think about our work as a series of projects and how those projects interact with each other. And again, not to get too philosophical, but it's becoming an emerging trend, and this could become a good catalyst to hit that. I think that is it for questions. We're hitting the top of the hour. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who was on this call for joining us, especially since it was scheduled so last minute. Thanks for taking time out of your day. Hopefully this was a little bit useful. If you have additional questions along the way, please feel free to email any of us. We'll also be publishing this online in the next day or so. I also want to thank Lori Sparger, the CIO and COO at Purdue University's College of Liberal Arts. Lori, I really appreciate your incredible insights along this, and also, again, your partnership and friendship over the past several years. You've truly been a thought leader in this space, and what you're doing on behalf of your students and employer partners in the entire industry is incredible. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I'll just have one final thought. So at Purdue, we love our astronauts, at the cradle of astronauts. And for me, for all of us, we are at that point in the movie Apollo 13 when they walked in with a box and dumped it on the table and said, what do we have in the LEM? That's what we need to use to get them home. And I think that's the point that we're at now, that we need to dump everything we have on the table, look at ways that we put the pieces back together that we haven't done in the past, so that we make this a positive experience and a productive experience for everybody on both sides.
Well, thank you very much, Lori. Thank you again to everyone. Most importantly, stay safe, wash your hands, social distancing, pretend you're like me in high school and be social distance. And again, have a wonderful week, and please don't be bashful if you have other questions or anything along the way.